Hey there, everybody. So in this lesson, we're going to look at what we call the power of a test is and what it can actually do for us. So if you remember from the lesson, we had this warm up where we were looking at the percentage of blemishes on potato chips. Now, remember in the lesson, we actually found that we would fail to reject the null, and in fact, there weren't significantly higher than 8% of the potatoes having blemishes. Now, in this lesson, we want to know how powerful that test is. Like, how sure are we that that really should have been the correct conclusion? So, let's just review a couple of things. So, a type 1 error, remember, is the probability of rejecting the null when the null is true. So, in this particular case, it's like saying or stating that the proportion of blemishes is actually greater than 0.08, when in fact, it's really not. And then for a type 2 error, so that's when we fail to reject the null given that the null is false, that's like stating that the proportion of blemishes is not different from 8%, when in fact it really is significantly more. So, the power of a significance test. All right, the power of a test. Basically, the power of a test is the probability rather of rejecting the null given that in actuality the null is false. And that's what you want to be able to do with the test. Like if something is wrong, you want to satisfactorily say, "Hey, this is wrong," and be pretty confident that that is really going to be the case. So the power of the test is how confident we can state that when we've rejected the null, we actually did so for the right reasons, because, hey, in reality, the null was false. Now, it's also defined as 1 minus the probability of a type 2 error. So, how do we calculate the power of a test or the probability of a type 2 error? So, there are three things that you can do. So the power of a test is influenced by these things, these three things. The first two are pretty straightforward. So the first one is the sample size. So if you increase the sample size, you increase the power. I mean, think about it. You get more and more samples, therefore there's less variability, therefore you're going to be more confident that your final conclusion is the correct one. So one way of bumping it up or increasing the power of a test, you increase that sample size. Now, another way is to mess around with the significance level. So if you increase the significance level, you increase the power. So what that means is, I mean, let's say you use 5%. That's a 5% chance that you are actually wrong with your final conclusion of rejecting the null. If you increase that to 10%, then you make the area bigger, like the critical region will become bigger, meaning that you have a larger area that you're going to be rejecting the null. So you're going to be more confident of rejecting the null if you increase the level of significance. Now, the third one is a little kind of weird. It's basically you want to look at the difference between the null and the alternative parameters. So if you have a bigger difference, you have a bigger power. So let me explain to you what I mean by that by looking at an example. So here we have our original problem, but let's change it a little bit. So let's say this. Let's wonder, does the test have a high enough power to say detect a shipment with 11% of blemished potatoes? So what I'm saying is, let's say in reality that the real proportion of blemished potatoes was 11%. Before we were saying that it was, well, it's maybe around 8%. We want to see if it's going to be significantly more than 8%. So in this case, a particular type 2 error is going to fail to reject the null when the proportion 8%, that's what we're looking at. But let's say we bump that up to 11%. So have a look at the chart right down here. So this area right here, that's my 5% because we were using a 5% level of significance. And this was the test statistic that I came up with. And as you can see, the mean that we're using here is 0.08. So the probability of a type 1 error would be this critical region right here. Now, the power of a test can change. if we change some parameters here. So earlier on, remember, we decided to reject the null at using 5%. Okay, so that's everything to the right of that green line. But let's say, hey, what if we imagined that P wasn't 0.08? What if in reality it was 11%? So then that changes the makeup of the curve. So now we have the center at 11%. But remember, the test statistic we got was this green arrow, this green line right here. So now this this area right here, we can calculate that to be 0.7626. So that means the power of the power of this test would be about 76%. So what that means is that there's a 76% chance that you're going to reject the null, given that in reality the proportion was really 11%. So increasing that difference will increase the power of a test. Now, on the statistics exam, you're going to need to know those first two, where you're basically increasing the sample size and you are increasing the significance level. Now, you need to know this one as well. It's highly unlikely that you're going to be asked to calculate the power of a test in this manner, but you should know that this is one way of increasing the power of the test. All right, if you have any other questions about this, please reach out to me and let me know. This is a little confusing, so I totally understand if you have questions. Remember, understanding the conceptual points here is really important. Being able to explain this to someone will guarantee that you're going to understand it better as well. So if this didn't quite make sense, please reach out to me. We'll sit down together and we'll hash it out. And by you actually having that conversation, you will get a little better at understanding what's going on. All right, thanks very much. And again, that's what I just said there at the end. Okay, so since we rejected HO with a significance level of 5%, if our sample yields a proportion of greater than 0.1, then we'd correctly reject that shipment about 76% of the time. All right, so get a little practice at this. Make sure you go to page 572, 573, and just answer those questions that are right there, questions 53 to 57. All right, thanks very much, guys. If you need anything, just reach out to me.